Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So we are in Parshat BeHa'alot'cha. That's the third Parsha in the book of Numbers. And up to this point, things have been pretty positive. We've all been setting up to go into the land of Israel. I'm sure that in all the previous sessions that we've had on BeHa'alot'cha, I have mentioned this many times, and that is BeHa'alot'cha represents a certain division, and that is,
Um,
yeah, go ahead.
Somebody should turn the radio off. I can't
Oh,
hear you.
Robert, please turn your radio down, Robert, if you will,
Or television or something.
or it's television. There
How's
we go.
this?
Yeah, that's much better. Thank you. Okay, cool.
Go
So
ahead.
we are, as you can see, moving into, we've gotten a lot of BeHa'alot'cha done. And essentially, at this point, we are going to Numbers, sort of moves into the tragedies that occurred to the Israelites in the course of their wanderings. I want to emphasize that originally they were supposed to go straight into the land of Israel after receiving the Ten Commandments. And then because of their choices and their poor mistakes, etc., they wind up wandering for 40 years. We haven't gotten to that point. We will have that. We will see that when we get to Parshat Shalach Lecha. But here we talk about their craving for meat and their complaining about the food, etc., etc. And so God sends them lots of food. All right. He sends, I think, quails. All right. Yes, Slav. There it is. Right there's the word Slav. So quails. And it says, so they just began to crave and eat and gorge themselves. And here
Mm.
it says, Habasar odenu ben shinehem. The meat, the flesh, was still between their teeth, terem yicharet, before they were cut off. Or it means before it was consumed. Probably that's what it means. Right, terem yicharet, before they were able to actually consume the meat. I'm thinking about that, right. V'af Hashem charabahem, and the anger of the Lord flared against them. V'yach Hashem ba'am, and the Lord smote the people, ma'ka rabba ma'od, a very great smiting, okay, that they had to bear the consequences of their gluttony. So let's take a look at Rashi. This stuff is not easy. It is not easy from a whole bunch of points of view, and we'll see it's not going to get easier. It is saying there is tremendous consequence for our behavior. I think that's the idea of it. And I feel that in some ways, given our addictions and the way in which we become addicted and give into our baser instincts, I mean, the Torah is trying to help us not to give in to those baser instincts. And the reason why we have those instincts is that that when they're used in a careful kind of way, in other words, it's important that we have these appetites, but if we can't control those appetites, that leads to our demise. And we need to know that. And remember, this is literature, so it's trying to impress upon us these particular ideas of the need to be able to control our appetites. Obviously, again, if we didn't have appetites, we wouldn't survive. But on the other hand, to give in to our appetites, that's we won't survive either. And so part of our own dignity and our sense of worth as human beings on a very, very basic and fundamental level is the degree to which we are able to control our appetites. There's a wonderful statement, honestly, it's one that I actually learned on my mother's knees, right? Ezehu gibor hakovesh et yitzro. Who is the mighty person, the one who controls or even, let's say, defeats his appetites, right? His his yetzer, his yetzer hara, okay, his evil inclination, and we all have to deal with it. So Rashi, terem yikaret, right before it was, and it ended. Ketargumo. So Rashi refers to the Targum. He says, ad lo pasak. In other words, before it had come to an end. In other words, they were in the process of eating, of gorging themselves on these partridges. Davar acher, another interpretation, eino maspik leposko b'shinav. In other words, literally by saying between his teeth, it says he had not finished cutting it up with his teeth. Ad shenishmato, ad shenishmato yotza, before his soul departed from him. So
Rabbi, are
again,
they eating it rare or do they cook it?
well, I think that I doubt if they would eat it raw. The issue, the reason the Torah doesn't go into that particular detail, I believe, Harlan, is because the issue is the fact that they were so craving it so badly and weren't giving into their cravings. So we have to just assume they were eating it as far as cooked or not. That is not the issue. We can assume that it was, that they weren't. Maybe it was raw. Maybe they were so ravenous, point you might be bringing out, that they were eating it raw. It didn't
Mm,
really matter. They were so ravenous. Okay.
wow.
So,
It's a shame they didn't like the food that God gave them.
well,
The
there we go.
manna,
In fact,
manna.
they were complaining about the manna, Harlan. They complained about it. Yeah. They felt it wasn't substantial enough. Right.
Wow.
And again, there's very deep implications on our own behaviors as to what degree do we appreciate the blessings that we have? To what degree do we even perceive those blessings? And wind up complaining and the what have you done for me lately kind of disease. So
Yeah.
anyway, all right, let's keep going. All right, let's go here. Here we go. Vayikra et Shem Hamakomahu, and the name of that place was called, or he called it, Kivrot Hatava, the graves of those who craved. Okay, Tava can mean a craving. It can mean a lust. It sometimes means the word lust. So, in other words, the graves of those who craved, those who lusted. Kisham kavru et ha'am hamitavim, because there they buried those people, the nation, right? Literally, it means right hamit avim. There's the ta'ava, who lusted, who craved.
Mm.
Don't think there's any Rashi on this. No. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. Going on. Mi Kivrot HaTa'ava, from Kivrot HaTa'ava, the name of the place, right? Nasu ha'am Chatzerot, the people journeyed to Chatzerot. Vahiyu beChatzerot, and so they were in Chatzerot. And now we go to a new issue. This is again, all these details have a level of tragedy involved with them and try to teach us. I think the purpose here is trying getting us to understand ways of behavior that we have to avoid and not do these things. That these kinds of behaviors are offensive. Okay.
Mm.
But to daber miyan v'Aharon v'Moshe. And Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses. Al odot ha'isha kushit, regarding the Cushite woman asher lakach, which he had taken, in other words, which he had married. He isha kushit lakach, for he had taken a Cushite woman. Okay. Let's go on. So Cush, of course, we would translate as Ethiopian, right? Although we know that he married Zipporah, and I guess we'd have to say that Midian, I guess, has some connection to Cush, but maybe not. I think as we read the Rashi, we could say that the text, that at least the way we understand this text traditionally, is it's using the term Cushite in not to take it literally, and you'll see how we are going to expound on that. Right. So here we are. In other words, bad mouthing, saying things that are cutting and critical. Daber. So he says the use of the Torah, of the word daber, of this root daber, ein dibur b'chol makom. So what we're saying is that when the Bible uses the word diber in those contexts, ela lashon kasher, it has a harsh connotation to it. The word daber has a harsh hard connotation. V'chein hu omer, and we see basically the place where we derive this idea, and this is in Genesis chapter 42. It's where the brothers are reporting on their meeting with Joseph. They come back to Jacob and they say, Diber ha'ish Adonai haaretz, the person who is the Lord of the land. That's, of course, Joseph was put in command, right? Diber, he spoke itanu kashot. There's the word kashot. He spoke harshly to us. So there, in a sense, the Torah defines the term diber as meaning it has a harsh connotation. Ve'ein amira b'chol makom. However, when it talks about amar uses that verb to describe speech, b'chol makom, in every place. Ela lashon tachanunim. There it has the connotation of a level of supplication. The word amar, supplication. In other words, a request. It could be a request, but in a lovely kind of way. V'chein hu omer, and so likewise we have a verse just a little later. Here we are, right? And it says Genesis chapter 19. Although to my mind, I wonder if it's, to me, interesting. I'm trying to think of, oh, yes, this is Lot. This is chapter 19 in Genesis, where Lot is appealing to the people of Sodom not to kill the angels, to kill these guests. And he says to them, Lot says to them, Vayomer alna echai. And he says, there we are, alna, please, my brothers, do not tarea, do not act wickedly. Vayomer Shim'u Dvarai. And likewise, he says, listen, please listen to my words. So there's this word na here, kol na lashon bakasha. Likewise, when it says na, it has the connotation of a request. And so it's the word, we would translate it as please. In other words, that word please is to try to soften and make respectful the request we're making. Going on. V'tidaber miyad v'aharon. So now we're going to go on. Miriam and Aaron spoke against, right? And this is in the Sifrei. This is the halachic midrash on the book of Numbers. He patcha b'dibur. She's the one who began this conversation. She began this discussion, right? Tchila, to begin with, right? She opened up this conversation, and lefichach, because he's asking. Now, normally Aaron, the high priest, right? You'd think his name would come first, but it's because she started this whole thing. Lefichach, and for this reason, hikdima hakatuv tchila. For that reason, Scripture placed her first. Uminayin hayta yodat Miriam shepiresh Moshe min ha'isha. And how did Miriam know that Moses had separated himself from conjugal relations? That's basically what it's saying here. How was she even aware of it? Conjugal relations are very private. How would she be aware of that? Okay. Also, we need to understand that it had to do with the fact that Moses was receiving prophecy constantly. And you may recollect that prior to the giving of the Torah, when the entire Jewish people, in a sense, were given that gift of prophecy and hearing God's words on Mount Sinai, they were told, explicitly mentioned in the Torah, to separate themselves from their wives for 3 days prior to the giving of the Torah. That engaging in conjugal relations is not something that can be done with prophecy at the same time. So Moses, of course, was getting prophecy constantly, and so consequently, he was not engaging conjugally with his wife. So how did she know this? How did Miriam know this? Here we go. Rabbi Natan Omer. So we have Rabbi Nathan says, Miriam Haita Betzad Tzipora, that Miriam was standing next to Tzipora, B'sha'ah, at the moment Shene'emar LaMoshe, when Moses was told, Eldad Umedab mitnab'im b'machaneh. So this is an earlier statement that we see, and where Moses basically has complained about the burden of having to lead the Jewish people, and God tells him to separate off 70 people, and that they have the prophecy, and two of those, actually two not counted amongst the 70, so there were a total of 72, which would mean, since there were 12 tribes, in other words, six people from each tribe, Eldad and Medam continued to prophesy. They continue to prophesy. And I think Joshua comes and reports to Moses about this, right? So he tells Moses, and Miriam is standing there next to Tzipporah when this news is brought, and she says, "Kevan shesham'at Tzipporah," that when Tzipporah heard that Eldad and Medam were prophesying, Amra, Tzipporah said, "Oy lenashotehem." It's too bad for their wives. Oy, woe for their wives. Shel elu, of these, in other words, of Eldad and Medad. Imhem niskakim linevuah, if they are connected to prophecy, sheyu porshim minashotehem, they will have to separate from conjugal relations with their wives, kederech, just as shepiresh ba'ali, just as my husband has separated from him, mimeni, from me. Umisham, and so Miriam was listening to this. She heard Zipporah saying this. Umisham yada Miriam, and then from this Miriam knew v'higida la'Aaron, and she mentioned it to Aaron. Uma Miriam, and we see that in the case of Miriam, shelo nitkavna lignuto, who did not intend really to humiliate Moses. She wasn't trying to speak against Moses. She was simply mentioning it, right? It was sort of gossipy, right? Kach ne'ensha, and we see that she was in fact punished. We see in a little bit that leprosy developed on her. Kal v'chomer, how much the more so, the mesaper b'gnuto shel chavero, one who speaks ill of his neighbor. And it occurs to me, relatively recently, I would say, that when we end our Amidah and we say Elohai Netzor Lashoni Meira, right? We have this additional prayer after the Amidah, after the central prayer of our service. We say, "O Lord, guard my tongue from evil." Netzor, lock up my tongue. Netzor Lashoni Meira. May my tongue be, or lock up my tongue from speaking evil. And of course, it's so tempting to denigrate other people, to denigrate various individuals. And we are told, right, this story is trying to tell us to avoid doing that, not to do it, because we're saying, Miriam didn't really plan on denigrating Moses, but and look at how she got punished, and can you imagine how we'll be punished if we denigrate our fellows? And it is, of course, so tempting, so tempting. And of course, where the work is for us to look into ourselves and try to determine what we need to correct and what we need to fix. So maybe it's an obvious lesson, but even if it is an obvious lesson, it's unfortunate that it's such a temptation, right? Ha'isha hakushit. This is again from a political standpoint. I have difficulty with this, and I think we just have to try and contextualize it. That's the best way in which I have of trying to these statements that I feel have a bigoted sound to them, and I don't feel comfortable about them. But I think the main point that's being made, though, I think is legitimate. It's just that it's couched in wording that I have. As I said, I personally have difficulty, and I have to contextualize it and make sure that I keep that element out of it in terms of the lessons that I want to internalize. Okay, so here goes. Magid, the reason she's called Kushit is it informs Shakol Modim Yofya, that everyone acknowledged how beautiful she was. Let's assume this is Sipporah. that Tzipora, everybody acknowledged that she was beautiful. Keshem shakol modim b'shchichruto shel kushi, just as everyone has to admit, right? Okay, or acknowledge the blackness of an Ethiopian. That just as obvious as it is that an Ethiopian is black, so they had to. That's why she's called a Kushi, right? Because she was so beautiful. Okay, and we notice it's sort of cool. There's a little gematria that Rashi throws in for us. The word Kushit has the value of 736. I'll do the math with you. So 20 plus 6 plus 300, that's 326. Another 10, 336, and 400, so 736. And begematria, Yefat Mar'eh, beautiful of visage, right? And the word 10 plus 90 plus 400. So we got 500. 40 plus 200. And 1 is 201. And 5 is 206. 246, excuse me. So 246 and 500. I'm sorry. This is, yes. This should be, let me make sure I got my additions right. So, yeah, it's 36. Interesting. So it looks like we've got a 10. Let's see. Hold on a second. No. This is 400 and this is 490. Forgive me. That's incorrect. It is a good Miratria. 490. 10 and 80, pay is 80, so that's 90, and tough is 400. So we do, in fact, get, yes, 790, 736. Okay. So that's the connection. From a gematria point of view, they both add up to the same number. So, alodot ha'isha, regarding the woman. Alodot gerusheha. In other words, it's not the woman herself, it has to do with the fact that he separated from her, right? That he was not close, he was not physically close to her. Ki isha kushit lakach, and again, remember all this verbiage in the Torah itself, trying to account for every bit of it, right? For he had taken an Ethiopian woman. Ma Talmud Lomar. What is Scripture trying to teach us? Ella, Yesh Lacha Isha. It's trying to teach us that there's a woman, Na'a B'Yofya, who is beautiful of visage, who's beautiful of form. Ve'ina Na'a B'Maseh. However, her behavior, her actions aren't so fitting. And sometimes there's a woman who's wonderful and beautiful in the way what she does and how she conducts her life. But she's not beautiful in terms of her looks. But Tzipora was in fact beautiful in every sense. Okay, I'm going to stop right here because I do need to get going. And so I'm going to put this in here. Let me see if I can get this here. Let's see. Oh gosh. Okay. Need to put in a line. There we are. Okay. And I'm going to stop the recording in a sense. Okay. Yes. David, question.
Yeah. So, is it actually in the Torah that Miriam overheard Sipporah? I mean,
No,
oh,
it is not. It is
so
not actually in the Torah. Yes.
okay, because it sounds like it's total speculation, or that I
Yes.
don't. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I think that's the reason why we're saying this is the suggestion of Rabbi Natan. We attribute that explanation to Rabbi Natan and say this is what he suggests. It's not like you must accept this. This is not the Torah. But if we want to understand better what the Torah is trying to get across, Rashi feels that it's worth quoting Rabbi Natan and what he shared. So you don't have to accept this, but
No,
it is a
that
way.
wasn't it.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
No, it's not in the Torah. That is the
Yeah. It
point.
was.
Yeah.
I was just trying to figure out where he got it.
Oh, I think
That's
it's his own creativity. He was trying to put together all the various components of the story, because on a superficial level, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Okay.
Got it.
Okay. So he's trying to get a sense of what exactly was going on here. So I'm going to stop the recording with this. Okay. Sorry.